Welcome back to Jack Stack. Today I'll be digging into my stack of Funko Pops to talk about Spider-Man. So, one thing I've noticed about myself when collecting Funko Pops is I like alternate versions of characters. And Spider-Man is no exception. I could care less about normal Spider-Man. I mean, I like the character and all, but I don't have much interest in getting a Funko Pop of Peter Parker Spider-Man. But Peter Parker's clone, and that one time Peter Parker's body was possessed by Dr. Octopus? Heck yeah! But before I go over the Pops themselves, a little backstory on the significance of these two figures. Let's start with this guy here, the Scarlet Spider. So, back in the 70s, one of Peter Parker's villains, called the Jackal, cloned Peter's dead girlfriend. You know the one, she was Emma Stone in those Spider-Man films. And Spider-Man himself was also cloned. Because comic books. But stuff happened, and the Jackal and one of the Spider-Men died. But it was left unintentionally ambiguous whether the clone was killed or Peter Parker was killed. Fast forward to the 90s, and it was revealed that the Spider-Man who supposedly died in the 70s was actually still alive. And he was the real Peter Parker, while the Peter Parker that readers have been following for the last 20 years was actually a clone. Because comic books. Except it was all a lie, and the guy from the 70s, who was calling himself Ben Reilly, was actually the clone, and the original Peter Parker was a real boy the whole time. Again, because comic books. But during the confusion over who is the clone and who is the real boy, Ben effectively became a second Spider-Man, with his own costume and superhero identity, the Scarlet Spider. And that's the first Funko Pop I have to show you here today, the Scarlet Spider Pop. The Scarlet Spider costume is iconic and faithfully represented in the pop. You may not be able to tell by just looking at random images of the Scarlet Spider, but the blue part of his costume is actually a generic blue hoodie, with a spider spray painted onto it. And that detail was not missed by Funko here. If you look closely, you can see the drawstring things that are part of hoodies. It even has the actual hood on the back here. Good stuff. And, as I have stated before, I absolutely love when Pops do something different with the arms instead of the generic arms at the side thing, and here is no exception. It's amazing how a simple hand gesture not only elevates the quality of the pop, but instantly identifies it as Spider-Man related. I love it. Although I have to say it, there is a part of this pop that bugs me, and it's finally time for me to get into this properly. As far as I can tell, all Star Wars and Marvel Funko Pops are bobbleheads, which means their heads are meant to be bobbled.
Oh, bobbleheads. You always think you're going to get bored with them, but you never do. Bubbly, 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 bubbly.
You wouldn't think I would need to explain this, but most of my bobbleheads, well, they don't bobble. These things have such huge heads that usually their shoulders physically prevent the heads from moving very much. Heck, on one of my Deadpool Pops, his arms are held in such a way that he literally doesn't bobble. If I hold him by the head, I can make his body bobble about. That isn't nearly as entertaining as bobbling their heads. And for some reason, the spring that serves as the figure's neck holds the head at interesting angles. Almost as if the pop is staring off into the middle distance, realizing it just made a huge mistake.
Hello, darkness, my old friend. I've come to talk with you again.
But if I'm being fair, this particular model bobbles more than most of my bobbleheads. So it's not a critique unique to this pop, but it's worth mentioning. Now, onto the Superior Spider-Man pop. Like I briefly mentioned earlier in the video, Superior Spider-Man was from a period of time where Dr. Octopus possessed the body of Peter Parker. Because comic books. But before Dr. Octopus can take complete control, Peter forced Oct to experience all the loss he lived through that made Spider-Man the hero that he is. Moved by the experiences Peter lived through, Dr. Octopus vowed to honor Peter's memory by being a better Spider-Man than Peter ever was. A superior Spider-Man. During his tenure as Spider-Man, Oct built his own version of the Spider-Man costume, complete with 4 extra arms. Because what's Dr. Octopus without extra arms? Not gonna lie, Superior Spider-Man is one of my favorite comic book storylines ever. So, once I found out this pop was a thing, and exclusive to Walgreens, I decided not to rest until I found this pop. So it was super lucky for me that I found it instantly at my local Walgreens. This is legitimately one of the favorite Pops that I own. The Superior Spider-Man costume is amazing, and the entire structure of the figure matches how the Superior Spider-Man did his thing. The spider arms are super cool. I even forgive that the arms almost completely prevent the head from bobbling. It's just that cool. And holy crap, I didn't even realize it till I was writing this script, but the arms also include the amazingly awesome web shooters that were part of his costume. It's just so cool. Also, non-generic arm pose. So, that wraps up my opinions of my Spider-Man Pops. Let's move on to suggestions. Like Dragon Ball Z, there are just too many Spider-Man characters to go over all the ideas I think would make cool Pops. So for my recommendations, I'm just going to stick to alternate versions of Spider-Man. And even that pool has literally an infinite number of characters. Once again, because comic books.
Spider-Man does whatever a spider can.
After Peter became convinced that he was actually the clone, even though he actually wasn't, Ben officially dropped the Scarlet Spider name and costume and became his own Spider-Man. But he made his own version of the costume, commonly called the Sensational Spider-Man costume. It's a pretty cool take on the traditional Spider-Man costume, while still being unique. Good stuff.
Spins a web any size, catches thieves just like flies.
During Ben's run as Spider-Man, he gets possessed by the Carnage symbiote. This design is just super cool and needs to be made into a pop.
Look out, here comes the Spider-Man.
So, the 90s Clone Saga was a 3-year train wreck that had a bunch of clones, not just Ben Reilly. One of these clones was Kane, and he was an evil clone. But within the last few years, he's been trying to redeem himself by being his own version of Spider-Man, also called the Scarlet Spider. Oh, and spoiler alert, Ben Reilly dies at the end of the Clone Saga, so Kane takes on the Scarlet Spider name in memory of his dead clone brother, who, spoiler warning again, is apparently still alive. I have it in my script to say, because comic books again, but even I'm getting sick of that bit. Look, the point I'm trying to make is, Kane's version of the Scarlet Spider is awesome, and should be a Funko Pop. They can even make a Chase variant where he gets otherized.
Is he strong? Listen, bud. He's got radioactive blood.
So there exists a Spider-Man in the year 2099. His costume is pretty awesome, but they already have a Funko Pop of that character. I want that figure, but more than that, I want a pop of the new version of this character's costume, commonly referred to as All New Spider-Man 2099. This is probably the coolest superhero costume I have ever seen. It would make an amazing pop. I would buy it in an instant.
Can you swing from a thread? Take a look overhead.
I'll be brief with this one. There's a Japanese Spider-Man, and he has a giant mech. I want that mech.
Hey there goes the Spider-Man.
And that's it for my recommendations. Thank you for watching. Tune in next time, where I dig further into Jack Stack and see what comes out. Catch you then.
In the chill of night, at the scene of a crime, like a streak of light, he arrives just in time.